Wonder if you can hear the rain pouring down in the background. Set the atmosphere. Ooh. I remember watching a video by my baby Dutch boy Thor High Heels where he discussed Cry of Fear. I never played the game and didn't know much about it at the time, but he said something that moved Cry of Fear to the top of my must playlist. That it's like a drug-induced Silent Hill 3. If you know me, you'd know that saying a game is like Silent Hill 3 will pretty much get me to play it because it's my favourite Silent Hill game of all time, and Heather is the best character in the franchise. No contest. James is nowhere near as good, so don't bother trying to argue otherwise. I watched some Cry of Fear trailers and looked at some screenshots, and yeah, definitely looks like a Silent Hill 3 on drugs. I also heard so many good things about this game, that it was one of the best survival horror games on the PC, and everyone who loves the genre should play it. Plus, it's free, so what's to lose? The developers of Cry of Fear began working on the game in 2008, a short time after they released their previous title, Afraid of Monsters, which I haven't played but plan to check out. Cry of Fear started out as a total conversion mod for the original Half-Life, but quickly got some buzz behind it and received several awards. Development wasn't easy for the team though, computers broke down, accounts got hacked, and the whole game was being worked on while the team were busy with high school and family. The game was delayed several times, so Team Scala, I think that's how you pronounce it, I don't know, I love butchering words. Well, they decided to keep pre-release information vague so they wouldn't spoil the game. They released the Cry of Fear mod on February 22nd, 2012, but Half-Life was required to play the game. It wasn't until April 25th, 2013 that Cry of Fear would be fully released to the public as a standalone free product, which is the version I played for this review. The story centers around our boy Simon. He likes wearing grey hoodies and fingerless gloves, and his aesthetic is that of every edgy teenager from the early 2000s. I would know. I was one of those edgy teenagers. Simon is heading home through the subway and comes across a man crawling on his stomach who asks Simon for help. Simon goes to help the crawling man when a white car down the street starts up, revs a few times, and slams into Simon. The driver, who definitely deliberately ran Simon over, flees the scene, and as our boy lays on the ground, probably dying, the guy who was crawling on the ground miraculously gets up and stands over him. Rather than giving Simon the help he moments earlier asked for himself, he just looks at him instead of trying to save his life. The game then has Simon navigate an area consumed with darkness and has to use a camera to reveal areas to progress, which you know results in jump scares. At the end, a big, shaking face appears out of nowhere and goes, and the game cuts to Simon in a completely new location at night, seemingly recovered from his injuries. Simon's phone goes off and he checks it to see a message from his mother telling him to come home. Because Simon is a good boy who listens to his mum, he decides to head home, but everything seems off. No one is around and all of the buildings are completely empty. As he continues, he sees signs of violence such as blood and dead bodies. Simon runs into several creatures that are trying to kill him, and to make matters worse, reality occasionally becomes nightmarish and looks like the otherworld sections from the original Silent Hill, with an edgy twist. Simon eventually runs into a mysterious doctor named Purnell, who is wearing a gas mask for some reason, and he's covered in blood. Honestly, I have more questions about the blood than the gas mask, but that's because of the COVID-19 world we live in. I am glad he is following the directives of health officials though. Simon tries to ask the doctor questions to find out what's going on, but the doctor spouts some mysterious dialogue and buggers off. Simon comes to believe the doctor is responsible for all of the creatures, bad shit that's happened, and the nightmare world. He decides to pursue the doctor so he can try to understand what's going on, coming across more and more horrible, violent, and nightmarish events that will force Simon to question if any of this is even real or if he's going crazy. Also, he still wants to get home because his mum told him his dinner's getting cold. I have pretty mixed feelings about the plot. Though I didn't mention it in my excellent synopsis, the game tries to tackle subjects like suicide, depression, anxiety, and what it's like to feel hopeless. But these themes act as window dressing. They are there and clearly on show, but the game doesn't dive into them in any meaningful or substantial way. The actual story feels like window dressing as well. What was there I found to be interesting, but the story barely has a presence as story beats are scattered and don't elaborate on anything. I honestly didn't know what Simon's drive was throughout the game. I knew he wanted to get home, but I don't know why that was included because apart from the text message in one section at the end, it's never mentioned. Dr. Purnell sort of acts like the mysterious antagonist, but I struggle to call him that because for the vast majority of the game, he's not considered a threat. He only shows up a few times, says some cryptic shit, and then just bails. I know Simon thinks he's responsible for all of the shit going on, but again, I don't know why. My main guess is that he's one of the only other characters in the game and the story needed a bad guy, so Dr. Purnell became that guy. Cry of Fear doesn't follow one of the most basic rules of storytelling, giving the main character to actual character motivation, you know, something they need to do or have to confront. I couldn't tell you anything about Simon's beside he's depressed and broken. I don't know who he is, what he believes, how he sees the world, anything. I don't even know his fucking mum's name. However, there is one piece of storytelling regarding Simon that I do like, which is when the player uses a syringe to heal themselves, you can see cuts on Simon's wrist. This subtle image tells the player a lot about Simon as it shows he self-harms and could be suicidal. He's pretty familiar with using a syringe to inject himself with a substance as well, which may suggest he has used drugs in the past. Both of these are great examples of telling the player a lot through very little, which makes it more of a shame that the story is so bare bones. It wasn't always clear why I was going to each location. You'd think Simon getting home or pursuing Dr. Purnell would be the reason, but as both of these things have so little presence, I refuse to believe they can be used as a justification. The story of Cry of Fear was clearly inspired by Silent Hill 3, which again, best game in the series. That game also involves a main character trying to get home who has to deal with monsters, a nightmare world, and a creepy antagonist. Very bare bones plot summary there, but I'm going to go with it. But unlike Silent Hill 3, Cry of Fear doesn't go any deeper than its core premise. I'm okay with minimal stories in games, but Cry of Fear clearly wanted to have a plot that incorporated dark and controversial themes. As someone who has dealt with depression, anxiety, suicide, and suicidal thoughts, I despise when horror games use these themes in their story simply because they think it's fucked up and scary. It's offensive, to be honest. If you're going to explore mental health issues, you better tell a good fucking story which justifies their inclusion, which Cry of Fear doesn't do. If you're a dev and writer and just want to include these topics because they can be dark and are used very often in horror media, but you don't have anything to say, don't fucking use them and educate yourself. The ending uses these themes again in a pretty bad and disgusting way in my opinion, but I'm not spoiling anything, so I'll leave it at that. It also dives into Simon's character more, but having this at the end is bad storytelling. The story didn't put in the work to build up to it, so the ending just feels lazy and undeserved. I wish Cry of Fear did more with its narrative because, as I said, the devs had a story they wanted to tell based on a few things that weren't taken from Silent Hill 3, but what is actually in the game is pretty shit. If Simon had more development and motivation, the story was given more time to develop, the themes and topics were respectfully implemented, and the ending was properly built up to, the story could have been something truly special. If you haven't played Cry of Fear and think you're going to get a horror narrative worth experiencing because you saw the plot synopsis or skimmed through the wiki, you're gonna be disappointed. Kudos to those wiki authors though, they told Cry of Fear's story so much better than the game itself. The core gameplay is like if Half-Life was shoved in a blender with survival horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, with a sprinkle of edgy emo vibes from the early to mid 2000s to sweeten the deal.
Dear Diary, mood apathetic.
The Half-Life shit in Cry of Fear is the combat, fast movement, stupid platforming sections, and the infamous crouch jump, but the puzzles that involved exploring or messing with the environment aren't present. The survival horror elements include the exploration, backtracking, design of levels, locked doors needing keys or codes, limited inventory and resources, and one puzzle. On the note of limited resources, the items in this game, whether it's ammo or a health syringe, are really fucking hard to see because they blend in with the environment. I missed so much shit because I couldn't see it, which is great when resources are already limited. I wish items had some sort of glimmer or were more distinct because I had to examine every pixel in the game to make sure I didn't miss any of these vital items. Fuck, it's pissing down now. Oh well, let's get the review going. There are some gameplay elements that differentiates Cry of Fear from the previous games I mentioned. The first is the cell phone, which can be used as a flashlight but also receives text messages, and if you find a number, you can make a call. However, there's only one time in the game where calling a number is required to progress, and you stop receiving text messages pretty early in the game, so this aspect of the cell phone is really underutilized. I wish more was done with it as it's such an obvious tool for cool horror moments. Overall, I only use the phone as a flashlight, and in that regard, it did its job. Another unique gameplay mechanic is the ability to dual wield two weapons, or a weapon and a light source. Since the game is so damn dark, I never dual wielded weapons, but constantly had the phone in hand and either a melee weapon or a gun. I used and abused this mechanic as there was barely a moment where I wasn't dual wielding. The only compromise with dual wielding is that if you have a gun, you can't reload it because your hands are all full. But besides that, my Sunderland tip for first time Cry of Fear players is to always be dual wielding. There aren't any limited saves or shit like that, but you can only save at these tape recorders and there are no checkpoints. So if you die, die, you are taken back to your last save, even if you've made hella progress. Save points tend to be spaced far enough apart to make death a real concern, which is good, but some are way too far apart, or placed directly before really annoying moments followed by an annoying enemy encounter, which can be, well, annoying. Besides that example, the save system didn't bother me. It didn't have the stress associated with limited saves, but it still evokes some of that feeling, which is pretty damn nice. There's combat in Cry of Fear as well, and that's a surprise if you haven't been paying attention to anything on screen. You get some weapons you can whack enemies with until they are dead. These include the switchblade, nightstick, shovel, and a few others. Each of them are unique as they all deal different damage. Some can be swung fast, but others are slow, and all their range differs. For example, the switchblade is fast and has decent range, but doesn't deal too much damage. However, the nightstick, which is my favourite weapon, deals good damage but has shitty reach and is slow to use. I like how the melee weapons all function differently. It means the player can find the one that works best for them. Since the inventory is pretty tight, the player will also need to carefully consider which weapon to use. The actual melee combat is pretty simple. Click until they are dead. The melee combat does tend to fall apart and becomes pretty frustrating once you encounter groups of enemies. More on the problems of enemy encounters later, but for what it's worth, melee combat does a good enough job and is a good last resort if you're out of ammunition for your guns. Speaking of guns, Simon gets his hands on a few of them. I'm not sure if he should be allowed to use guns considering this and this.
I mean, I wasn't exactly the toughest kid in school, was I?
But from what I know about the NRA, he's an ideal member. Simon finds a Glock 19 early in the game, which was the workhorse gun for my playthrough. It did decent damage and ammo was pretty abundant, but not enough that I could turn into the Doom guy. Later in the game, you can get a flashlight attachment for it, making the Glock one of the most valuable and versatile weapons in the game. As Simon progresses, he comes across more guns, an M16, a sniper rifle, a pistol that shoots 3 bullets at once, which I picked up, used once, and threw away, a powerful revolver, and a shotgun. Cry of Fear has one of my favourite ways to give a player a gun. That's just fucking beautiful. Unlike the pistol, ammo for these guns are pretty scarce, and I found I only use them in boss fights or as a last resort. Thanks to the game being a Half-Life mod, they all feel good to use and have their own positives and negatives, making choosing which one to use one of the toughest decisions in the game. I tended to stick with the pistol and shotgun, as all the other guns didn't have enough ammo available to make them viable. I also made use of the M16, which was great at destroying enemies quickly from a safe distance. It doesn't make sense that Simon can wield high-powered firearms as good as a trained soldier, but it didn't make sense why Gordon Freeman, a theoretical physicist, could kill waves of trained soldiers, so it's best to not think too hard about it. A cool feature of the game is if the player reloads while bullets are still in the clip of the gun, you lose those bullets. Cry of Fear forces the player to decide whether to go into a new fight with only the few bullets left in the gun and possibly reload at a bad time, or reload the gun and be better prepared but lose precious bullets. I really enjoy these small decisions the game constantly forces the player to make, so simple tasks like reloading a gun have weight. I do wish certain ammo types were a bit more abundant. I know it goes against the whole survival horror thing, but some guns have such little ammo available throughout the game that I only use them once. Bringing them with me in the hopes of finding a bullet or two wasn't worth the limited inventory slot, which could be used for something better. Speaking of the inventory though, the inventory is Simon's pockets, which can hold items that can be placed as quick select slots, and 3 slots in his bag, giving the player 6 inventory slots to work with. Everything, weapons, Simon's foam, the flashlight, and story progression items take up slots. Ammunition doesn't, which I thought was strange at first, but I soon realised the developers were being quite generous. I never played a game with such a restrictive inventory system. I feel like I had more freedom playing as Chris in the original Resident Evil. I'm not against this kind of system, but this inventory system results in one really annoying situation that happens all the bloody time: excessive backtracking. You constantly need to drop one of your items to pick up a key, use it to progress, then walk all the way back to pick up what you just dropped before heading back to the door you unlocked. Sometimes these trips are short, most, especially one in particular, are quite long. It's this tedious, repetitive problem that is the issue with the inventory system. Managing your limited space isn't a negative. It is great for forcing the player to make tough decisions. The problem is when you are forced to backtrack through large sections of the game, or because the inventory is so restrictive. Having just one more slot would fix the issue, or an item box the players could dump stuff into. It honestly seems like this decision was made purely because inventories are restrictive in horror games, and honestly I think that's pretty shitty. The stamina bar makes Cry of Fear the Dark Souls of survival horror games. 2020 isn't too late to make that joke, yeah? The bar affects the player's dodge and sprint and is balanced really well with the dodge. It depletes enough that you can dodge a fair few times in a fight, but you just can't spam it. Good shit. What is not good shit is that Simon can't run for long before he gets tired and has to stop. So if you're swarmed by enemies and need to get some distance between you and them, tough shit, because you ain't getting far. Oh, and the enemies run too, so even if you manage to get away, they'll close the gap real fast. Fucking awesome. I haven't seen a sprint mechanic implemented this poorly since The Evil Within. It makes fights annoying as you can rarely catch your breath. It's particularly frustrating when there is a chase sequence with an enemy that can kill you in one hit. I died a lot because Simon couldn't run for long without stopping for a break, even while being chased by a guy with a chainsaw. There are a lot of fucking enemies in Cry of Fear. Not an hour goes by without a new enemy being introduced. I'm exaggerating, but you get my point. A lot of enemies operate in a very similar manner. They charge towards you wielding a knife or a hammer. I think some were reskins with the tiniest of changes. The most memorable enemy like this is a woman wielding 2 knives who lets out a blood-curdling scream that always made me jump. The combat got pretty repetitive as these reskin enemies are used a lot. The effort put in to make them somewhat unique is pretty cool, but also kind of felt lazy as though not enough was done to make them distinct from one another. They should have just cut some of the reskins and used the other enemies more. The other enemies are cool, but since there are so many, I'm just going to focus on the ones I found the most interesting. The first is the Drowned. She looks like a ghost from a Japanese horror movie, which is one of my favorite designs. This monster's melee attack is a baby bursting from its stomach wielding a knife who wants to cut you to ribbons if you get too close. This is fucking cool enough, but the Drowned truly becomes amazing when Simon is exposed to her for too long and has bullets in his gun. If this happens, the screen will go a little bit darker and Simon will start to whimper. The monster then forces Simon to put the gun to his head, and if you don't slam that left mouse button fast enough, Simon will pull the trigger and kill himself. If you manage to avoid committing suicide, Simon will cry, showing how traumatizing the whole thing must have been, which is a nice touch. Encountering the Drowned wielding a melee weapon removes her suicidal influence, which is a really cool attention to detail. Her presence could be interpreted as Simon fighting the desire to kill himself purely through gameplay, which is fascinating. The first time I fought this monster and Simon started to put his gun to his head, I was shocked, confused, and blown away. I'm really into stuff like this and had never seen an enemy in a game interact with the player in such a way. She is super easy to kill and tends to bug out when you put her down, but none of that takes away from how unique she is. I'd love horror games to have more monsters like this that attacks players in ways that I've never seen before. The next enemy is the Psycho. He calls the asylum home, which makes sense as, well, his name is Psycho. He wears a paper bucket on his head, is covered in blood, and wields an axe. I like him because he's a walking, talking jump scare. He likes to hide around dark corners or in rooms and remains completely silent until Simon walks by. When that happens, he screams at the top of his lungs and sprints towards Simon, his axe held high. I'm not gonna lie, running into these guys scared me so fucking bad every time. They hit really hard as well on top of scaring the shit out of you, which is great because the player must quickly compose themselves if they want to survive. They made exploring the asylum so tense. I was always on edge and moved slowly because I didn't want to hear that. While I enjoyed the enemies when I encountered them by themselves or 2 at a time, Cry of Fear likes to pit the player against large groups of enemies at once, and oh boy, this shit drove me insane. This seems to be inspired by the shitty monster closets from Doom 3, which I have reviewed, link in the description by the way, just go check that one out, it's an oldie but a goldie. Guess what my gorgeous viewer? Cry of Fear's combat, survival horror mechanics, and enemy attacks are in no way designed to work in scenarios where there are loads of fucking enemies. Nearly all of them run faster than Simon, so in a group they swarm and overwhelm you, and you can't read their attacks and dodge accordingly as the game has taught you to do. No matter what you do, you'll take a lot of damage. If you're really unlucky like me, you'll die again and again. This brings the game to a screeching halt and it's like smashing your head against a brick wall. One moment in particular burnt Cry of Fear's game over screen into my retinas. Late in the game, I came across a hole in the ground that led to a long ass hallway where a voice revealed key parts of the story. After a long walk, I found a door that opened to a tiny room with a big head in the center, freaking the fuck out. It also deals damage if Simon gets too close. This was a really cool visual, but oh boy, I was so blissful in my ignorance. 2 hidden doors open and reveal 3 enemies each, who, of course, run fast and deal decent damage. I was not prepared for this as I had just completed a challenging section and was low on resources, making it all so much better. The room was so fucking small, it was near impossible to avoid getting hit. They like to attack all at once, and I wasn't able to dodge effectively. All of this bullshit alongside the big head in the middle of the room freaking the fuck out that dealt damage. When I managed to kill them all, I had no ammo or health, health. The exit opened, which was another monster closet, and 2 fast crawling enemies blocked the door and fucked me up too, bringing my blood to the boiling point. After many, and I mean many, attempts, I killed all the enemies and headed to the door. Then, the floor crumbled and I fell down into a dark void full of enemies, including one-hit chainsaw guys, which you have to avoid while sprinting to the exit. I died so many times because the chainsaw guy just kept killing me. And guess what? The save point previous to this fantastic piece of game design was just before the extremely long hallway. Every time I died, I had to walk through this fucking long hallway and hear the same voiceover just to get back into the room where I would most likely die again. And I did, a lot. The devs should have put the save point after the long ass walk in the hallway because it drove me fucking insane. I got so desperate because of this utterly bullshit section that I tried to find an invincibility or infinite ammo cheat, but there was none. So I persisted and died so many times that I could make a death montage with the footage. Actually, I think I'm going to. I got so frustrated that I ended up backtracking through the whole previous area, which mind you, is extremely large. I did this because I wanted to scour every pixel to see if I maybe missed an item or ammo or something that I could use, and after backtracking for about 15 to 20 minutes, I found one M16 clip, which luckily was enough to get me through it. This part of the game nearly broke me. There are many other examples of monster closets and small areas in the game that aren't nearly as painful, and I'm not saying that Cry of Fear shouldn't have sections of loads of enemies, but if they are going to run so fast and cause so much damage, the encounters need to take place in open areas and not in a small room with a crazy fucking head in the middle that deals damage. I rarely get legitimately angry at a game, but this moment in Cry of Fear filled me with so much rage that I looked up fucking cheats because I didn't want to deal with its shit anymore. Okay. Well, that rant's done, so I guess we'll get on to the big bad boys, the bosses. Take it away, future Sunderland. Thank you, past Sunderland. There is good boss variety in Cry of Fear, both in their design and the fights themselves. Each boss looks cool, grotesque, and unique. The first boss Simon encounters is Sora. Sora or Sawyer, a tall, hairless dude with nails sticking out of his body wielding a chainsaw. I am in love with his design. It's like he's inspired by Pinhead from Hellraiser but without the BDSM and nipple piercings. When I first fought him, I shot him more times than Barzini's men shot Sonny Corleone, and I soon realized, unlike Sonny, the boss wasn't taking any damage. This was the unique aspect of his fight. You have to hit him until he falls to his knees and a weak spot appears on his back, where you can finally deal some damage. Mace gives another unique boss fight. He is another tall dude, this time wrapped in bandages with a bloated tongue hanging out of his mouth. He's also wielding a mace. Now that I think of it, Sawyer or Sora had a chainsaw. Mace has a mace. Real creative naming conventions here, I must admit. Mace is invulnerable to damage too, but unlike Sawyer, he won't reveal any weak spot if you hit him enough. However, the room you're in is flooded with water and there are valves on the wall that power a generator. If you want to kill Mace, and I advise that you do that, you need to dodge his attacks, turn these valves, and quickly run to a section of the room that is raised out of the water before the electricity turns on and damages the boss boy. I really enjoyed how this fight did away with the conventional shoot the boss until it's dead thing, and instead required the player to think outside of the box. I'll keep the other boss battles as a surprise, but I reiterate that each fight is different and memorable in its own and unique way. This doesn't mean they're hard, nearly all of them are super easy. They all move pretty slow, go down relatively quickly, and the game gives you more than enough ammo and syringes before each fight, so you don't have to worry about running out of resources. The game does make up for this easy difficulty, as the boss attacks do a lot of damage. Some can even kill you in one hit. This would be annoying in a different game, but I always ran rings around these guys so they rarely hit me. If they didn't kill me, the game would just pop me in the room before the fight. Since the fights don't take long either, death isn't a major punishment. So the fights are easy, and while more of a challenge would have been nice, I still enjoyed every single one of them. In my opinion, bosses in survival horror games tend to be the most underwhelming part of the game, and in some cases, survival horror games would be better off without boss fights. The Cry of Fear devs got creative with their boss encounters and tried to do something different and interesting, which adds a nice cherry on top to the overall experience. But you know what Cry of Fear really fucking loves? Hey, come here. Come closer. Yeah, hey. I'll show you what it fucking loves. Cry Cry of Fear is obsessed with jump scares. Some they do well, and others suck. The clip I played is the first instance of the many jump scare set pieces in the game. I honestly enjoy these little jump scares because they usually came before a really tense or unsettling section where the game has built up tension, and the jump scare caps it off. They weren't cheap, like when games are designed around jump scares. Cry of Fear also likes to go boo with the enemies. These guys love to appear out of nowhere or run at you or smash through a door, all while screaming so fucking loud. Every time the scare got me good. At first I didn't mind them and found them fun. I did just praise an enemy design to do that after all, but there are just so many that after a while they lost their fun factor. They aren't built up like the set piece scares and felt cheap sometimes. If you have any sort of heart condition or fucking hate jump scares, Cry of Fear may not be the game for you, as they are an integral part of the experience. However, most of the time they are utilized well and add to the feeling of unease that's throughout the game. I just think the devs needed to relax with the enemies popping out and screaming. There aren't many puzzles in Cry of Fear, apart from remembering which key goes to which door, and finding codes for a lock. Finding the solution to these puzzles was unique and often memorable. In one example, when finding a code for an elevator, Simon has to locate a videotape and a VCR player. Once you put these two things together, you get this neat little video that reveals the code. Even though this was a unique way to get the solution to the puzzle, the core of this puzzle and others like it remain unchanged. Put thing in thing. Most of the time you will find solutions without an elaborate series of events, so when the game randomly throws in an actual puzzle, it was quite jarring. The only thing that I could actually describe as a puzzle takes place early in the game and requires the player to read a poem and position some statues based on what they read in the poem to unlock a door. Putting statues in a specific place based off a poem is one of the most overused types of puzzles in survival horror games. Its inclusion here also feels completely out of place because the player hasn't encountered a real puzzle prior to this and won't ever again. It comes across as nothing more than an homage to other survival horror games that's been included simply because the devs thought they had to have a puzzle because of the genre of the game. Not a big deal, but the developers should have stuck with what they knew and simply have the door require a code or a key. At least then I wouldn't have wasted my time pushing animal statues and having flashbacks to the worst parts of Resident Evil. Yuck. I don't think I've ever played a survival horror game with Mario platforming shit in it, but Cry of Fear does, and can we not do this ever again? Most of the time, these sections involve jumping across rooftops or planks of wood connecting buildings together, traversing around the sides of tall structures, or crouch jumping into a window because Half-Life mod. However, the holes are too tight and I had to be pixel perfect if I wanted to fit inside. I think there's a joke there. Is there a joke there? These sections are harmless, albeit janky at times because Simon has some weird momentum. He either runs faster than I do from my problems, or slower than me facing my problems, so I would constantly overshoot jumps and fall, or barely jump far enough and fall. While not a big deal in most occasions, holy shit do these small issues become massive annoying problems when Cry of Fear decides to make the player do long platforming sections where if you fuck up in the slightest, someone will fall and take damage, which is fun, or he will fall to his death and have to start this whole section over again. The worst example of this is when you need to gain access to another building, and the only way to do that is by using an elaborate plank of wood structure. This small section is one of the most frustrating parts in the entire game. I could just tell you how much I hate this platforming section and just leave it at that, but no, I'm going to tell you a story about how this part of Cry of Fear made me want to scratch my fucking eyes out and get as angry as that kid who had his World of Warcraft account cancelled.
Okay, my mom just canceled my brother's World of Warcraft account, and he is flipping out.
So straight away, the first obstacle is a crouch jump onto the plank, but it's so fucking difficult because Simon's hitbox is too big and the gap is too small, so you need to be pixel perfect or you won't squeeze through. The second is this jump from one plank to another, which I fucked up many times because I hadn't got the hang of his momentum at this point. This section wasn't too high up, so I didn't take any damage, but that would be a short-lived victory. The next few jumps were easy, but I was getting higher and higher, and not the kinds which makes Doritos and salsa the best thing ever.
Man, ain't nothing wrong with smoking weed.
The next jump was from one building to another, which was a bitch because there was no run up, so I missed the jump, but this time I also take damage when I fall because I'm so high up. To add salt to the wound, I had to restart the whole annoying fucking process again. I fall down several more times, which is making my blood boil, but finally get to the long jump again, and you know I fucking missed it and took more damage. I guess third time is the charm because I finally made it, but as soon as I land, a headless asshole enemy from the building next to me starts fucking shooting. He hits me once, and if I'm hit one more time, time I'm gonna die. I've never experienced a more intense gunfight in a game before because I was so close to escaping this platforming nightmare and didn't want to die again. Luckily, I killed the fucker, jump over the last gap, and I'm finally done. Bruh. Now let me repeat that. Bruh. Just rewatching the footage of me playing through all of that made me feel really bad for past Sunderland. I just wanted to go to him, put my hand on his shoulder and tell him, stop. It's not worth it. I never, ever, ever want to have to do anything like this again in my entire life. I'd prefer to walk into oncoming traffic. That platform section is annoying enough, but imagine if you had to do something like this, but under a strict time limit, and make the jumps more difficult. Well, Cry of Fear has got that covered. I have watched a couple of Let's Plays of Cry of Fear while working on this review, and so many of them get frustrated at this platforming section inside a train dangling off the edge of a track. And I shared in their frustration when I had to do it in my playthrough. There are so many crouch jumps in this section that need you to be pixel perfect, and you already know how I feel about crouch jumps and how they don't work well in this game. And also, where you need to go or what the next jump will be isn't really clear, so you will find yourself getting confused, making the smallest bit of progress after you fought with the crouch jump, only to fail and have to restart over and over again because the timer ran out and you died. This part just shows how iffy the platforming is and how frustrating it can be when the player is forced to fuck with it under duress. One important thing Cry of Fear really nails is the horror and how that translates into constant tension and unease. This game had me on the edge of my seat so many times and due to a variety of different things. The moment-to-moment gameplay and exploration was tense enough as I never knew what was around the corner or who. The way the environments are designed helped elevate the fear caused by my uncertainty. Everywhere was just dark enough, just spooky enough, that the sound of a pin dropping on the floor would cause me to throw my mouse into the air while I screamed like every YouTuber who played this game. But my screams of fear were genuine, and it kept this pace up through the vast majority of the game. Later in the video, I'm going to discuss some places in the game that I thought were creepy, but I also want to talk about two other environments that had me generally unsettled. They were the university and the train tunnels. I won't go hella in depth because this video is long enough, but I want to touch upon them. So universities are already scary because of the thousands of dollars of debt you get into when you just walk through the front door, but abandoned universities have this really eerie feeling to them, like you're not supposed to be there. When you get to the uni, it's all bright and shit. There are no enemies, no bloody messages or stuff like that, everything is normal, which gives the illusion that nothing spooky is going on, but as I said before, it still feels really eerie, and I think that is because as a player, I was not used to a supposedly safe place like this. But once you grab the thing you came for, all the lights turn off and a fuckload of monsters appear out of nowhere. This moment was an expertly crafted jump scare because of how well the game built up to it, through providing the player with the ability to explore the uni without any threats. The uni gets so tense because you have to fight against all these monsters in complete darkness. Even the flashlight doesn't really help because the halls of the uni are so long and there are so many rooms, nothing is properly illuminated and enemies can appear out of nowhere and fuck your shit up. I died a few times in this part, and every time I wasn't upset because I thought it was a bullshit section, but because I knew I had to go through this extremely spooky moment all over again. But one of the most memorable scary locations in the game was the bloody train tunnels. The setup for this section is beautiful because you get down to these tight, twisting dark tunnels and your only source of light is a limited amount of flares that cast a red tinge over the environment and barely illuminate what is in front of you. And that is the only sort of help you will get because this place is oppressive. You constantly have to navigate these large, pitch black tunnels which feel labyrinthian. I was always unsure if I was going the right way, and that made me feel so confused and lost, which only added to the dread. The scares get elevated when you have to crawl through these extremely small air ducts. Much like the main tunnels, these are also labyrinthian. There are so many options a player can take, most of which lead to dead ends, but even so, the fact there are so many twists and turns the player can take always made me feel lost and unsure if I was going in the right direction. They felt super claustrophobic, and I don't suffer from claustrophobia. Now what makes it worse is that the only bloody light source you have are the flares, and the train tunnels quickly become one of the most unsettling and confusing parts of the entire game. And the devs of Cry of Fear use this to their advantage, by doing that thing I love where they show restraint in the scare department, only to freak me the fuck out at a moment where I least expected it. It's just so simple really. Throw the player into a dark maze-like location and take their light away to make them more uncomfortable, and bam! You've just made a really spooky and fun place for the player to get scared. I couldn't praise this section enough, so I'll move on to something else I want to praise Cry of Fear for doing. And that is how it knew the player would be scared in specific sections of the game, and how they used that to their advantage. I would come across shit like small hallways or underground passages or tight tunnels and vents where in other games, I wouldn't think twice and I would just keep on trucking. But because Cry of Fear works so hard to make the player feel on edge, and in my opinion achieves that when I came across these mundane things, they were no longer mundane. I would say out loud, "Oh, get fucked," as I visualized all the things the developers had in store to make me shit myself. The small tunnels and vents were the worst. As I said before, I don't have a phobia of confined spaces, but that doesn't mean I want to spend all my time in a fucking vent. And I just knew that if I crawled into this bloody vent, some fucking thing was going to appear out of nowhere, crawling towards me, which is legit a visual that terrifies me, and I would freak the fuck out. I didn't sign up for this shit. Well, technically I did when I started this channel and decided to install this game and play it for review, so I guess the joke's on me.
When I put on this mask, I can do anything I want. You can't see me, but I can see you.
The beauty of these moments is that most of the time, nothing happens. No monsters, no jump scares, nothing. But because of the tension and the expertly crafted horror they have forced me to experience in Cry of Fear, I always thought something was going to happen, and in my opinion, that unsettling foreplay before a scare is always the worst part. There are so many oh get fucked moments in Cry of Fear, and my reaction upon coming across them was always the same, no matter how far into the game I was, or how many times I made it through these types of situations. I know I have a lot of problems with this game, and I will go into more problems later in the video, but one area I cannot fault the game is how effective it was at making me uneasy and how often it scared me. Cry of Fear is basically a game where you constantly feel like a jump scare is about to happen, and you get all tense, uneasy and shit as you wait for that thing to pop up and go boo. To maintain that feeling throughout the vast majority of this game is something to truly praise, and the developers should be proud of themselves. Cry of Fear is a fucking scary horror game at times, and I don't get scared easily. I live and breathe horror, but this game got its claws into me, and I was always nervous to see what else it had up its sleeve. Moving on from gameplay, there's still one big elephant in the room that I need to talk about. Cry of Fear has a lot of bugs, and is pretty prone to crashing. I won't go through all that I experienced, but I'll highlight some that really stuck out. The first bug I noticed was a weird flickering that would happen when I used a flashlight or entered an area with a strong light source. This happened throughout my entire playthrough, so that's why you've probably seen it in the footage. Another involved this gate. When I walked through it, instead of going into the next area, the game would turn me around and put me back into the room I just tried to leave. I tried so many times to use this gate like an actual gate, but it wouldn't work. Every so often, I would appear in the next area, but most of the time I didn't, and this just baffled me. Another fun bug was when my screen went completely white while the model of my gun was completely black. I had to restart the game to fix that one. Another was when enemies were killed, their death animation wouldn't trigger and they would just freeze in place before snapping out of existence. And then there were the crashes. Cry of Fear crashed on me so many fucking times. It would sometimes happen randomly, but most of the time seemed to be the game not liking that I was doing something in a particular way. Use this flare in this exact place where you've had to use flares throughout the entire section. Crash. I died. Crash. Once it crashed so hard that it froze my computer. I wouldn't call the game unstable, but there were enough instances that it broke the experience and sometimes even stopped me from actually playing the game. It felt like the game was being held together with tape and good intentions. At any moment it could all fall apart. Ending on a negative note isn't my thing, so I'll say that most of the gameplay in Cry of Fear is really good. Although there's some big glaring issues in the game that made death seem welcome, everything else made the game enjoyable and I had a good time for the most part. The gameplay pulls off the combination of Half-Life and other survival horror games, a combo I didn't think could exist or work, but damn, Cry of Fear proved me wrong. It provided a unique gameplay experience that also felt familiar, which made it easy to sink into. The story did a terrible job at encouraging me to keep going, but the gameplay took on that role and made me excited to see what was coming next. You know, until I encountered another monster closet or platforming section which can go get fucked. I guess ending on a negative note is my thing.
Hello? I can't hear you. Who is this?
Because Cry of Fear is a Half-Life mod, there are some geographical similarities between the two games. Cry of Fear expands upon the foundation Valve set and created a world inspired by Swedish architecture that is extremely detailed, varied and atmospheric. The levels are separated into two styles, open and enclosed locations. The open ones do a good job of making the city feel like it's an actual city that's rich with detail. There are abandoned cars everywhere, payphones, rubbish all over the place, bus stops and everything you can imagine when you think of a city. The enclosed locations make up the majority of the game and are usually inside buildings or places like train stations and underground tunnels. They each have winding paths, levels, rooms, and sections. My favourite locations in the game are the Silent Hill 2 inspired apartments and the forest, because I love the Blair Witch Project. Not that Blair Witch, especially not that Blair Witch, but this Blair Witch, which is highly underrated by the way. I also like the Asylum because besides an unassuming house in suburbia owned by middle class white people, an asylum is the best horror setting. The apartments are influenced, sometimes blatantly so, by the ones in Silent Hill 2. Like those ones, the apartments in Cryopia are dripping with atmosphere. Each floor is connected by an awesome, super gothic horror spiraling staircase that I absolutely loved. The hallways are pitch black and feel like they go on forever. When you use the flashlight, the way the shadows flicker made me think something was there, which always put me on edge. The apartments feel lived in. They aren't overly dirty or anything, but there are things strewn around the place that suggest someone lived here recently, which makes exploring this place all the more creepy since there is no one there now. A lot of the locations have little stories within them that the player can uncover if they want to, but they aren't integral to understanding Cryophia's story. One story made the apartments really memorable for me. You stumble across some pretty intense secret notes written from the perspective of the apartment predator, a serial killer and pedophile that stalked the apartment. One note in particular perfectly encapsulates how much of a piece of shit this guy was. And you're about to hear some incredible voice acting in 3, 2, 1.
Those kitties are so cute. They look so lovely. I just want to touch them, but then those parents come. That's why I have to kill them.
At one point, you come across a secret room in one of the apartments, which is the trophy room for the apartment predator. There are pictures of his victims everywhere, and the whole place just screams, a serial killer pedophile lived here and likely killed his victims in this place. This could ruin the apartment when it's on the market, but considering rent prices these days, I'd take advantage of a bargain no matter the baggage. I also love how this story is connected to the environment. There are little children enemies that are possibly a representation of his victims, which made me feel bad when I killed them for the second time in their lives, but they should be used to it. This whole bonus narrative changed my perspective of the apartments and made them a hell of a lot creepier to explore. At first I thought they were good, spookier apartments, but after reading the secret notes, stumbling across the murder room and seeing the children enemies, the apartments became tainted. Knowing what happened here made the place feel dirty and cruel, which added to the unsettling atmosphere they evoked. The next place I want to discuss is the forest. The entire forest is pitch black with only a few lights here and there, nowhere near enough to help you navigate through the woods. The first section, called the outer forest, is massive and packed with dense trees, rock formations and bodies of water with the sounds of birds and cicadas chirping in the background. All of this shrouded in darkness. You do get a lantern, but it doesn't illuminate the area as well as the flashlight, so the forest retains that feeling of dread. There are lanterns strewn about leading you where you need to go, but each one is separated by long stretches of darkness where anything could jump out and kill you. The second part is called the deep forest, which is like the first forest, but deeper. This is separated into several sections. The first is a large clearing, the second is another wooded area but with an abandoned building in the middle and a monster woman that just fucking screams at you, and the third is a maze of trees. This section has a unique enemy, hanging women who hurt the player if they collide into you. Honestly, these enemies are stupid and pretty fucking insensitive. It's as if the developers thought, how edgy can we be? And there was this one dude writing Limp Bizkit lyrics on the cover of his notebook and said, what about women hanging themselves as enemies? And they all high-fived and fucking drank Monster Energy drink. I already mentioned how I believe they misuse themes of suicide and depression, and this is a perfect example. Besides that bullshit, the woods are creepy as fuck, and this is achieved by the atmosphere built from the darkness and limited light, and the trees and other objects obscuring your path that feel like they're going to consume you. This part of the game was basically a better Blair Witch game than the actual Blair Witch game. Lucky last is the asylum. It's an abandoned asylum, so that in and of itself is creepy as fuck, and thankfully the devs didn't try to make mental health or suicide a part of this level. What I love about the asylum is how it feels like an abandoned asylum. There are signs of vandalism and graffiti everywhere, showing kids have broken in and fucked around. All of the rooms are almost empty, except for a disgusting mattress and dirty crap everywhere. The asylum is separated into 3 levels with super dark hallways connecting each. The power is out, so this whole place is pitch black. Cryophy doesn't do the cliche asylum shit that a lot of horror does. This isn't the Outlast asylum with people strapped to a gurney or watching static on a TV. I don't think I saw any stupid wheelchairs lying around either, so that is a fucking relief. The devs knew that asylums are already creepy, so they kept it simple and just used our inherent fear to fuel the dread, adding some extra cryophy layers to heighten the dread as well. I think these environments succeed in keeping the tension and atmosphere through their brevity. You don't spend too much time exploring these places, so everything remains fresh and unfamiliar. Cryophy doesn't follow this pattern throughout the entire game, and one chapter brings the game to a crushing halt as it's one of the most tedious and boring parts of any horror game or any game that I've ever played. Chapter fucking 4. My good friend and resident e-boy Wild Potato Industries perfectly summed up my feelings on chapter 4. And oh boy, did it fucking drag. It begins with Simon reaching a subway and discovering a locked door that needs a fuse. After fucking around for a while, you have to go all the way to the other side of the map to find the fuse in a school, which of course triggers a monster closet and you have to kill lots of enemies and escape. Then you bet you've got to walk all the way back to the subway, this time with nothing but the sound of your footsteps and the voices in your head telling you how fun this is. You bring the fuse to the door and open it. I thought, finally, the game's pace just died, but now it will get back to it. Simon comes across Dr. Purnell, who runs through a door and locks it behind him. And guess what? This door requires fuses too. Not just one, but 2. So you need to grab the fuse you just used to unlock the door all the way back near the fucking start of the level. Not only that, but you have to also go all the way back to the apartments to find the second fuse, which is a whole long process as well. So far, I walked back and forth through almost the entirety of the game up to this point multiple times, and it was only just getting started. In the apartments, you go through that annoying fucking monster closet part with the big head in the middle of the room that I talked about previously and went crazy about, so just go and add all of the problems and complaints I had about that to the frustration with this level.
Wow, the land of make-believe.
Now you have the context of what I had to go through, you can understand why I was so done with chapter 4 at this point. You eventually come across the second fuse, and guess what? You have to go all the way back from the apartments back to the subway station to use the 2 fuses to unlock the door. Thankfully, the last section is a really cool maze Simon has to navigate while avoiding monsters hanging from the roof that will kill him in one hit. It's super confusing, but I absolutely loved it. At least the worst chapter in the game ends on a high note. This whole chapter is a lesson in what not to do with backtracking in a survival horror game. Don't make it pointless, excessive, or a fucking waste of time. Shorten this section dramatically or take the whole thing out. I don't care. Chapter 4 has burnt me so bad that it makes me never want to replay Cry of Fear. But now that I've stopped bitching, I will say I honestly didn't dislike any of the environments, even though I disliked how some of them were used. All of them are detailed and each are creepy in their own way. The devs tried to make the locations as realistic as possible because they knew people find fear in the relatable, and how unnerving it is when something we relate to isn't quite right. That kind of restraint is what makes Cry of Fear's locations distinct and memorable. Cry of Fear has levels called nightmare sequences as well. These are sections in the game where things get extra spooky and transform a location into a bastardized, fucked up version of itself. The game practically crushes up a disc of Silent Hill 1, rolls up a $20 note, and smashes that line straight to the dome. When the game transitions into a nightmare sequence, the world gets extra grimy and rusty. There's usually blood on the floor and the walls, and sometimes the level layout becomes illogical. Paths will be suspended above black voids, and they will twist and turn in a contorted manner. Other sequences will have bloody messages scrawled on the walls, and some will have floors made of fencing, which when you walk across them, triggers hundreds of hands to burst from the floor and hurt Simon as he tries to walk over them and get out. Every nightmare sequence is memorable and some of the best parts of the game. Like many great things, they are used sparingly, so I didn't get used to them and was always surprised when they popped up. During these sequences, I was having a horror orgasm exploring every corner, looking at all the creepy shit, reading all the messages written in blood on the walls, and geeking out whenever a spooky set piece happened. I love the question the nightmare sequences pose since they are so out of this world. I kept asking myself whether this was actually happening or if there was some form of hallucination and Simon was losing his shit. I think the devs knew the player would be asking that question and used it to their advantage, and I give them a Shia LaBeouf clap for that. The complaints I do have about these sections is that they implement aspects of the non-nightmare parts that piss me off, like the platforming sections or monster closets, and oh my god, that room with the head freaking out is a nightmare section. No, I will not stop complaining about this. That aside, the nightmare sequences are horror concentrated and executed wonderfully. If real life was like this, I would be so happy because honestly it'd be better than the shit show of reality we currently live in. The sound design in Cry of Fear is fucking excellent and is one of the main reasons why the atmosphere I mention so often is so thick. Each environment has unique sounds which fit the surroundings. The city is eerily quiet, all you can hear most of the time is the sound of your footsteps and the wind blowing through the alleys. The other sounds disrupt the quiet, which works well to instill tension, and that happens a few times. This makes the otherworldly sounds come out of nowhere and really make you go, oh fuck, what was that? The apartments have some of my favourite environmental sounds. There's a leak somewhere which has flooded the lower floors, so water can be heard trickling from the ceiling or down the walls. There is a quiet hum of what I think is the air conditioning that unsettles me for some reason. The confined space of the apartments makes sound echo down the halls and makes faraway noises feel closer. Sounds such as people crying or footsteps come from above. There are so many other great examples, and I assure you the sound design in this game is executed really well and is used effectively to create a certain mood or make the player's imagination run wild. The same can't be said for the voice work in Cry of Fear, because I think it's pretty trash. Or trash may be too harsh of a word, as the developers are based in Sweden, so English isn't the first language of the voice actors. Besides the person who voiced Simon, most of the actors have only done one piece of voice work, and that was for this game. So they may have actually been the developers, and their experience is fairly minimal. Usually I don't have a problem with this, and in some cases it can be charming or add to the experience because of the story or its setting, but Cry of Fear's voice acting is overly stilted.
Hey,
the fuck are you doing?
The conversations are too awkward and the people don't sound like real people. This could have been a deliberate choice, but Cryfear does nothing with the story or the setting to make the characters acting like this fit into the game. This is also a major problem for me when the game deals with dark topics such as mental health, suicide, drug addiction, a serial killer that rapes and murders children, murder but not involving kids, violence, love, heartache, death, and more. The scenes that touch some of these touchy topics require certain emotions that need to be delivered in a realistic and meaningful way, if the developers want the player to feel anything or be engaged. I don't doubt the voice actors try their best, but they are just unable to actually deliver the performances needed. Simon's voice actor is the best, but he's still not good, and unfortunately his character is the one that requires the most in terms of delivery and conveying emotion. Simon is a broken and troubled character who's struggling with so fucking much, and sometimes the voice actor conveys that effectively, but a lot of the time, each line has no emotion and sounds identical. Just a weird, sad and confused tone that turns into yelling when any emotion needs to be conveyed. The range isn't there.
What? What do you mean?
The other voice actors all have the same problem too. English isn't their first language, so I feel bad for criticizing it, but it really takes away from the experience. I assume the developers wanted me to feel the same sadness and trauma that Simon and the rest of the cast feel throughout the game, but I just couldn't connect with them on that level.
Yeah. Sure.
Luckily though, the music in Cryfear is something I really fuck with. Most of the tracks are slow and have an ambient and eerie soundscape. They use lots of synths, pianos, and ambient sound. There are definitely some more experimental tracks as well. These are what I think are the best tracks, which show the range of music in the game. One of my favorite chill tracks is ironically called Anxiety. It features a guitar playing a simple melody accompanied by a crackling sound resembling static. This combination of instruments and sounds is meant to convey what it's like to have anxiety. The guitar acts as a calm headspace, and the random static acts as the anxiety showing that it's always present, no matter how happy or calm someone is. Using music to show how engrossing and intrusive living with anxiety can be is pretty cool. Some tracks do that Silent Hill thing where they utilize strange and creepy sounds. I'm Sick is one such track, which features a weird siren noise that is pitched up and down, and a bass drum playing at a very low tempo. The song invokes the image of someone who is deathly ill in hospital. The pitch sounds act as the heart monitor and the slow drums acts as the heartbeat. It's easily one of my favorite tracks. The song Saw Your Skull is one of the oh fuck, oh shit songs, and it's very cool. Similar to I'm Sick, Saw Your Skull has a drum beat that plays at a much faster tempo, conveying a heart beating rapidly, which is appropriate considering the song accompanies a tense moment. It also features a booming metallic sound and a high pitched and distorted noise that instills the feeling that shit's fucked. If you like songs that stretch the definition of what a song can be, you should check out the track with the loveliest title in the history of music, Kill Yourself. There's that developer's edge again, but just have a listen. Pretty fucking wild, but it's also really unsettling because of how unconventional and alien it is. When used correctly, these tracks can be the difference between a moment being a little spooky and fucking terrifying, and Kill Yourself falls into the latter category. Though Cryfear has a killer soundtrack which is used well in the game, the devs also knew the power of silence. There are so many moments where there's no music playing, and the focus of the sound shifts towards the environmental noises that make the player sit in the atmosphere. Music is an effective tool in horror games, and it's important to know when and how to use it. I think it's equally as important to know when to strip the music back and use silence to make the player feel uncomfortable, and Cry of Fear's execution of silence is top tier big dick shit. A lot of Cry of Fear's music does something that I really appreciate, trying to replicate human emotions or a state of mind to convey how they feel purely through music. Whether it's anxiety, sickness, or terror, each song is expertly crafted to make the player feel those emotions, while other songs disregard that altogether and try to unsettle the player as much as possible. They also know how to use silence. The music is one of the best and well executed parts of this game. I was honestly blown away when I heard them in the game, but even more so when I sat down and listened to the tracks by themselves. Whoever worked in the music deserves so much fucking praise. I found so much to love in Cry of Fear, and I wanted to love so much more. But for every 2 things I found amazing, there was one thing that annoyed me or downright pissed me off. For the most part, the gameplay is excellent, combat feels good, and the enemy design and variety is welcome. The bosses are all unique, and some require more unconventional approaches to kill them. The survival horror mechanics work really well, and the unique things it brings to the table are fantastic and make the game stand out. All of that is held back by poor design decisions like overly limited resources for some weapons, frustrating and unfair enemy encounters, and platforming sections that needed just a bit more polish. The environments and levels are varied, atmospheric, and so much fun to become engrossed in and explore. But then there are sections dedicated to some of the worst, most pointless instances of backtracking I've ever seen in a game that bring the pace to a halt and drag on for way too long. The story has some interesting elements, but I wish the story actually had a presence in the game. What was there was barely a plot, and I mostly had no idea what was going on, or why I was doing anything at all. And the ending does fuck all to improve that. I absolutely love the music and sound, but the voice acting was bad. As I said, it may be because English was not the actor's first language, but it still took me out of the experience. Cry of Fear is a great game held back by so many things, which turns it into a frustrating but okay game. What works really well, and people should play it just so they can experience the excellent parts of the game. But I find it hard to recommend completely because of all the annoying and frustrating shit that permeates through most of Cry of Fear, which makes me never want to replay it. At the end of the day, I enjoyed Cry of Fear, and I'm glad I finally got to play it because when it worked, I got to experience some of the best that horror games have to offer. If you like this style of game, or if you think it sounds interesting after this review, you definitely should play it. I had a lot of fun, even though the game tried so hard to make me have no fun at all. You made it to the end of the video. Good work. If you have played Cry of Fear, let me know what you think in the comments. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up as it really helps the channel. And if you want to see more stuff from me, then hit subscribe. I have a Discord which I've linked in the description and in the top comment, so come along and hang out with some cool horror nerds. I also have a Patreon, so if you want to support me that way and get some extra goodies, go to the link in the description and the top comment as well. Thank you to all of my Patreons displayed on screen and to all of my subscribers. Your support means the world to me and I am so grateful. And finally, thanks Cass for editing. You are the best that's ever lived, the real MVP, and I'm forever grateful for the meticulous editing brain that you have. I will see you all in the next video. Ciao ciao.